all the years that we lived in Vance, Alabama, on our property was a quarry, a rock quarry, and it was called Rock Quarry Hollow. And in that quarry, years ago, people used to cut millstones. And I know Will, he went over there, made a trip over there, and he took some pictures, and it was a millstone, and he asked me about it, and I told him what it was. And there was a gristmill in Vance, and that gristmill ran one Saturday a month. And it used millstones, and that's one of the things that those millstones were used for, was for that gristmill. And the gristmill, when it would be running, it had a John Deere tractor motor driving the gristmill, and you could hear it running thump, 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 and it blew smoke rings. And of course it had water running through it, and it ground corn for cornmeal, and then it ground feed for livestock. And part of my job was one Saturday a month, my brother and I would have to go down in the corn crib, and we'd have to shuck corn, and then we would have to shell it until we got 60 pounds. Of course, we didn't have any way of weighing it. We had a cotton scale, but we just measured out what we thought was 60 pounds, about all I could carry. And we put it in a bag, and it was my job to take that to the gristmill on a Saturday morning. So, you know, after we got it shelled and everything ready, we had a regular bag for it, a tow sack or whatever you want to call it. And then I would carry that on my bag to the gristmill. And when I got to the gristmill, there'd be people lined up there to get their corn ground. And they had a big porch, and you take your bag and you put it on the porch in line. You'd be behind the next guy, and then there'd be people coming in behind you, and that meant that's when your corn got ground. And when they ground the corn, we didn't have any money, and so when they ground your corn, there was no charge for it, but they took a scoop of corn out of your bag, and that was the toll. And they kept that scoop of corn for themselves. They used it later to sell corn to the grocery stores, you know, sell cornmeal to the grocery stores or feed it to the livestock or whatever, sell the corn. Anyhow, I would go over there on Saturday morning, take my bag, put it in line, and then I'd just play around. I'd go over there and play on that old car that you sometimes saw. You know, it was made in about 1900 buggy. It had a buggy style motor on the back of it, and there was a cotton gin there, and that old car would be up there by the cotton gin. I'd go up and play on that car and climb around on the bales of cotton, things of that nature, just to kill time. And it might take 3-4 hours before they got to my bag of corn. Just depends on how early I got there. But usually by noon, the cornmeal would all be ground, because they'd usually get that out of the way by noon. And then after noon, they would start grinding animal feed, you know, for the animals. And the people would bring that in wagon loads, and the pickup truck loads, and whatever they had, and they would unload it, and they would grind it, and then they would put it in bags and put it back in their wagons or their trucks or whatever. And then, of course, my job would be to take my bushel of corn, and now I've been turned into cornmeal, and take it back to the house. And of course, when I would get it, they would give it to me, and I would head out to the house. It would still be hot. In the wintertime, that felt pretty good. You know, you throw that bag of corn over your shoulder, cornmeal, and you carry it down the road. In the summertime, it was a little bit sweaty because it's hot. Of course, you don't want to set that bag of cornmeal down because it gets dirty. You know, when I get home, Mom would lay a little belt on me for getting the corn dirty. now my brother, he would help me shell the corn and shuck the corn, but they would never trust him to go to the mill and get the corn ground, because they no telling what he'd do, because if he got tired of carrying it, he might just lay it down, walk off, and leave it. That was just the way my brother was.
He's about 2 years older than you, right?
Yeah, he was 2 years older than I was. And of course, at that time, I was maybe 10 years old, 11 years old. Even before that, probably I was doing it. But that was always my job. And my mom, we would use that bag of cornmeal for the month. You know, make cornbread. And we also fed it to the dogs, you know, because she would cook our meal, and she'd usually make a whole cake of cornbread for the dogs. And you'd break it up in pieces and feed it to the dogs, and that way, you know, we didn't buy any dog food or anything like that. But it usually lasted a month, and of course the chore of shelling a bushel of corn was a tough one, because we didn't have a corn sheller. A lot of people had corn sheller where you put the ears of corn in and you turn the handle and it would shell it for you, but we had to shell it by hand. And what that consists of, you had to shuck it, and then you take your hands and you shell that grains of corn off of that cob, and it would wear your hands out. You'd be bleeding pretty quick if you didn't do something about it. So what we would use another corn cob. And you take that corn cob in your hand. If you knew how to do it, you could hold that corn cob in your hand, and you rub it against that ear of corn, and you could shell the corn, and you could do it pretty fast. You know, if you had a good special corn cob, it would work. But that was one Saturday a month. And the thing that got me out of doing in the spring mostly was working in the field, because you know, while I were doing that, I wouldn't have to go, you know, help plow or pick cotton or do anything like that one day a month. But when I got back home, of course, I'd give the cornmeal to my mom, and then after lunch, I'd have to go in the field like everybody else. But we worked in the field every day. Especially when my daddy was home, and he was home on the weekends. He was a coal miner, and he worked nights, and he would leave like 10:30 in the morning, and you go catch a ride, because we didn't have a car or anything, and he'd have to walk to Vance, and then somebody'd come by and pick him up, and then they'd go work in the mines, and then they'd bring him back about 12 o'clock at night, and then he would have to walk in the dark home. He'd usually have some kind of a carbide light or something like that to get home with. But that was kind of my experience one Saturday a month. Okay. You can shut it off now.